fellow SPED 2010 students. I hope everyone had a great week last week. So the last couple of weeks we've been learning about behavior, specifically trying to figure out the function of the behavior. So we learned about ABC analysis, what the triggers were. We looked at functional behavior assessment and how do we use that to implement what we call a behavior intervention plan so we can support children in our classroom. So this week we're going to shift to talk specifically about the autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. So we're going to be learning about these types of learners, and we're going to be able to, after we're finished with this week, we're in the material covered, we're going to learn about learning factors that may influence the ability to learn for students who have disabilities, or if they have a special needs and they've been diagnosed with ASD. So with this also, we're going to be specifically looking at these types of exceptional learners, but we're going to look at, those psychological and behavioral characteristics associated with this. We're going to look at maybe the prevalence. We're going to define what it is under IDEA, but we're also going to be looking at some of the educational considerations for you in the classroom specifically. So you're going to have reading this week out of Chapter 9, Exceptional Learners textbook. And I wanted to talk about some things specifically in Chapter 9 that I want you to pay close attention to. I also gave you a resource here for Autism Speak. So this is a great web page. It really talks to you about, what it is, what are some of the signs, what are some of the causes. And this is also a really great resource for you to use not only as a teacher in the classroom, but you may refer parents to this as a resource. It even goes into talking about access services and intervention to support the students. So I would like you to kind of navigate and go through and look at this webpage. I do have a Nearpod presentation here for you. I checked the link. The link should be working in Nearpod. So this is really going to give you an idea of autism. It's going to connect with what you're learning in Chapter 9, and it's also going to kind of give you an understanding of autism, but even kind of give you some feedback to see, what have you gained as far as knowledge, and maybe some things that you don't have an understanding deeply as you should, and get some clarifications. So the Nearpod presentation there is in there for you. So you could either click on it or you can join at join.nearpod.com and then enter this code and you should be able to get into it. I checked the code as a student and went in and it was working. But again, if you find the link not working, please let me know. So moving on, I said that I wanted to talk a little bit about Chapter 9 and kind of go over some things that I want you to pay attention to. So in your reading, you're going to be reading Chapter 9 in your Exceptional Learners textbook. And what I want to specifically look at in Chapter 9 is I want us to look at the definition, right? So IDEA, how do they define on page 203 autism spectrum disorder, okay? We are also going to be looking at pages 203 and 204. We're going to look at those characteristics, right? So what are those major characteristics we're going to be looking at? I said we were going to give the definition of IDEA. It also talks about page 204, the definition on Individual Disabilities Education Act and how they define it. And then on page 205, I want you to specifically look at prevalence, right? So how many students have this? So actually 1 in 54 students will have autism or be diagnosed with the autism spectrum disorder. So what this means is that we have to look at how the numbers have risen within the last 50 years or so. And why do we think this is happening? So in the textbook, it talks about some theories that they have as to why there's a rise or an increase in the numbers of children who are diagnosed with this autism spectrum disorder. And some of the theories go back to like the neurological makeup. There's one even theory talking about how vaccinations are connected to why children have autism. They're looking specifically at microflora in the brain and how this can be connected to autism. They're talking about it could be hereditary, maybe someone in their family, they carried that gene. And then we're also looking at the environmental toxins and how this might have an effect on why children may have been diagnosed with autism. On page 211, I specifically want you to look to table 9.1 where it talks about the warning signs and what to look at. So it talks about early warning signs and then warning signs that are more apparent as they get older. So these are just things to look at. On pages 212 through 215, the book dives into psychological and behavioral characteristics that is associated with someone who has autism spectrum disorder. So these are things that for you as a teacher to really pay attention to, because you're going to see these behaviors displayed in the classroom, but also they're going to be apparent at home. And then as a teacher, the last part of the chapter really is important. It starts on page 216. It goes to the end of the chapter on page 224. And it really dives into, as a teacher, what are some of the educational considerations that you should be doing to support them? In the classroom, what does it look like if you support a child with autism spectrum disorder? Now, after you read your chapter and you went through the Nearpod presentation, I want you to do your homework. So you have another IRIS module that really gives you an overview. So you as an educator in the classroom, what should you know about evidence-based practices or EBPs for children who have autism, meaning how are you going to support them? So remember, this is a lifelong developmental disability. Okay, it can have significant delays for the child developmentally, and there's going to be a lot of behavioral differences that you'll see. There's some primary characteristics that you'll see, such as social communication, social interaction between peers and parents, showing interest in things, and then also repetitive patterns of behavior, which is how IDEA defines ASD. In here, I'm not going to go for the sake of time, but it lists here a lot of evidence-based practices that you should be looking at. And you can see that's connected to the educational considerations in Chapter 9, right? So we're trying to look at the antecedent, or what we call a trigger. So what kind of behaviors, what kind of occurrences interfere with the behavior? How can we reduce some of those unwanted behaviors, right? So cognitively, what kind of management or control could we teach or skills to help that child overt that behavior? We also have to look at how are we enforcing the types of behaviors that we look at. If the learner's engaging, do they understand? Are they exhibiting that inappropriate behavior still? And how do we help them? How do we interfere? We talk about specifically trial teaching. We talk about exercise, how this can reduce problem behaviors, extinction. What does that exactly mean? We go back again to what we learned in functional behavior assessment, or those FBAs. And remember, this is a way to collect that data that you need so we can interfere with that behavior, right? Then we have what we call functional communication training. And this is really replacing those behaviors, right? Those communication behaviors. And we look at functional communication training is including that piece of FBA, but we want to look at giving them alternative behaviors, right? So we can make that challenging behavior extinct. How do we model this in the classroom? What kind of interventions can we provide, right, that they would be interested in? And looking at the environment in your classroom, look at their routines, look at their home life. How can we embed those interventions? We also have to think about how do we get other people involved to help us support them, such as the parent or their peers, right? Teaching them the social skills within their environment. How do we help that child in multiple ways, in multiple learning styles with multiple people? I'm not going to go in a bunch of this, but this is really great information that really talks about, these are bunches and bunches of research that we see happening with supporting students who are on the autism spectrum disorder or autism spectrum. We also, I wanted to show you looking at specific age levels. So early childhood, what would those focus interventions be? A lot of that has to do with visual supports at the young age, visual boundaries, visual cues, and visual schedules. So it really goes into how to support them. Looking at those comprehensive interventions as an early childhood teacher, what would that look like as well? Then we look at a bigger age level, such as elementary and middle school, and what kind of supports can we put in for them. Okay, you'll see it's more not in the terms of visual, but reinforcement and the different types of reinforcement and modeling. Okay, so there's some great videos that give you an example of how to support them and model this for a student of this level or age group. And then we talk about high school and beyond. So think about not only high school, but when they transition into that, when they're out of high school, that transitional period, we have to teach them more of them self-management strategies, right? So self-instruction, setting goals, self-monitoring, self-reinforcement. So it's helping them transition into adulthood and what that would look like and what supports are necessary for them to help. And then it talks even more about some of the situations faced when you're working with children on the spectrum disorder or in the spectrum, and it talks more about like giving you examples of the family's perspective and then also a teacher's perspective, which helps. Now, for your homework, what you're going to be doing is after you go through the actual module, you are going to submit some of the questions for me. So after you complete it, I want you to gain a deeper understanding and get feedback. So how we're going to do that is there are actual questions and assessment, right, in this module. They're also going to be found in our second test, quiz 2. So some of these things and wrap up I want you to look at specifically, which is going to help you as a study guide for quiz 2 or test 2. And you're going to answer inside of the module questions 1 through 6. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to, just like we did before, you're going to copy and paste them in a Word document. And once you have them completed, you are going to submit them to Dropbox. Now remember, they have to be completed. So like for example, I'll show you in just a minute, but there's a chart on question 3C. You have to make sure you complete that because that's part of that section. So I'm going to show you the wrap up. So in the wrap up, it has some very good examples of how you could give supports or those evidence-based practices for each individual group. And I will be asking questions about this on the test. So that's what I was talking about in the assignment instructions. Now you will be doing the assessment. Remember, you're doing questions 1 through 6. Okay, so all the questions on the assessment, so you can copy and paste it. You'll see there are videos here. I do not want you to copy and paste the videos, okay? It won't anyways, but I don't want you to try. You'll just do the questions, right? So you will use the videos to help you answer 3, and then you will also use it to help you answer 3C. So you will need to copy and paste this table inside of the Word document. So that's what you will do for how you're going to be assessed this week. And that will again go to Dropbox. All right, so that's what I have for you this week. I hope you learned a lot about autism spectrum disorder and some of the interventions that you could use depending on what grade level you're going to be working with. I did want to note something. You'll see here October 19th is when the Service Learning Journal is due and when you're supposed to get your hours completed. Your hours, your log and your closing documents have to be completed by November 5th. Now this is to be completed by the teacher you replaced with. You cannot submit this, and this doesn't need to go inside of Dropbox. The only thing going into Dropbox will be your journal for service learning. The service learning log and closing documents have to be emailed to me directly by the teacher, or they can print it out and have it completed and filled out, and then they can mail it to Water State. So either way that they choose to do, but that will be completed by the service learning teacher, not you. And then for your journal, that will go into Dropbox. Now I had a few people email me saying that they were going to be late a few days. We got students placed a little later than we anticipated, so if I already communicated to you, then you should know. If you have questions or concerns about the due date, just email me or contact me and we can talk about that. Alright guys, I hope that you guys have a great week and reach out if you have any questions. So until next time, take care.